Welcome to a sponsored webinar by JEDOX, hosted by CPA Australia. Be ready to take on the future, Augment Planning with AI. My name is Melissa and I will be hosting this webinar and available for any troubleshooting questions you might have with your WebEx setup. We have people joining us from all over the country for today's webinar. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners from around Australia and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today. I would also like to acknowledge that today we are being joined by CPA Australia Board Director, Merrin Kelsall. Thanks for joining us, Merrin. I would now like to introduce you to today's chair, Jan, who will facilitate this session. Jan, I'll just open your mic now.
Hello, Melissa, and hello, everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, Jan. Over to you.
Thank you, Melissa, and welcome, everyone. I'm the Technology and Transformation Lead for CPA Australia, and it's my pleasure today to welcome our presenters, David Upton, Lewis Carias, and Adam Downing. David's had an extensive history with more than 20 years experience in analytics, enterprise performance management. He works with CFOs and business leaders across industries to increase their organization's capacity and speed to respond decisively through better planning and analytics. David holds a Master of Business Administration and Bachelor of Information Technology. He began his career in financial services after co-founding a consultancy that ultimately was acquired by JEDOX. David has served in multiple leadership positions, including Vice President of Operations for the APAC region. Our second presenter today is Lewis, and he's the Director of Deloitte Consulting. And Lewis has extensive experience in finance transformation projects with a particular focus on operating model design and corporate performance management. Having operated in multiple line, finance and advisory roles, Lewis is passionate about helping finance organisations to improve their decision-making, decision support capabilities, which ultimately leads to better decision-making. He blends business acumen, technology awareness, and effective communication skills to support end-to-end data in the insights cycle. He holds a Bachelor of Business Administration from the Melbourne Business School, hello fellow alum, and an Enterprise Information Management Diploma from the Madrid Polytechnic University. His experience spans across the public and private sector, and he's worked in power and utilities, mining, government, FMCG, and telecommunications. And our third speaker is Adam. You'll see both David and Lewis have their cameras on, so hopefully Adam will too. Yep, hi Adam. Is the Manager of Deloitte Consulting, Finance and Performance. Adam has experience working across finance transformation projects, delivering insights into finance operating model design, process improvement and people capability. Working on projects across both public and private sector, Adam is interested in how organisations can leverage new finance systems and technologies to change the way they operate and make decisions. Adam graduated from the University of Sydney with a commerce degree majoring in finance and is currently undertaking a Master of Data Science and Innovation at the University of Technology, Sydney. He has held finance roles for the New South Wales Government and has consulting experience across government sectors, central government agencies, financial services, banking and insurance, FMCG, not-for-profits and utilities. As Melissa mentioned, we'll be taking questions through our Q&A box, and that you will see on your right-hand side. sorry, just getting to the right place in my notes here. Now, before we hand over to the first presenter, I'd like to just ask, because a lot's happened over the last month, David, could you share some of your views on the new normal for many businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much, Jan, for that warm introduction. And I'm very happy to be here with both Liz and Adam, and I'm looking forward to sharing our views here. And perhaps whilst we're giving this introduction, Melissa, we could move forward past the agenda to the next slide after that. So I guess we're here today to talk about AI, but the reality is so much has happened this year that so many industries are facing, really an inflection point with a need to change. And a lot of organizations are grappling with digital transformation in months instead of years. And whilst we've all had to adapt, in the short term, this has meant more digital collaboration, Teams, Zoom meetings. As you can see, I'm at home at the moment. There is fundamentally nothing more, in my view at least, digital than AI. And AI is really what we're going to talk about today. In the past years, there's been a lot of hype about it, but truly AI does hold profound implications for our roles in finance, for how accurately we plan, how frequently we plan, and ultimately, I would argue, how we collaborate on our numbers. And just to bring it back to the crisis, planning really has taken center stage. So last year's budget, frankly, is dead. So perhaps, Lewis, you could share from a Deloitte perspective how this is changing the way businesses are planning. I think you're on mute.
Here. All right. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, pleasure to be here. So if we go to the critical thing is that COVID-19 and the pandemic, they've really highlighted the importance of having a good planning process in place, right? And a lot of the things that we're going to discuss today in terms of what we consider are good planning practices, they are not new. It's probably a bit of a nirvana we've been trying to chase for many, many years. But there's a number of technologies available today that are making that a little bit more accessible to most businesses. So as for the comment that we have in there in terms of the COVID-19 is to what extent can you be able to create a scenario easily, get input from the different parts of your business easily, select the right analytical tool to create a view of what your results may be. That's what's required right now. But I will argue that it's just the crisis is reinforcing that need. It's not a new need in a way. And if we talk a little bit about what we call good business practices in terms of planning, so your planning should be proactive and responsive. So meaning that it's not something that is driven necessarily by a planning calendar or your annual budgeting or perhaps a quarterly forecast. We need to get into a situation where you can actually produce a forecast when the environment has changed or when there is a high degree of uncertainty that you need to resolve and you need to plan for. And that ability to actually produce a forecast quickly on the spot also requires a set of capabilities within the organization. So obviously your information model and your data model needs to be in the right form so you can actually produce that quickly. And your process needs to be streamlined, so it's not, you cannot waste weeks of time re-reviewing the numbers or reapproving the numbers. And the partnership between finance and operations is right now at a really critical point. So finance really needs to get into understanding operational drivers and having the right discussion with the business to understand the implication of finances. And if we go into the collaborations, it's an interesting point in terms of in the future and right now, how the decision-making process looks in an environment when it's a collaboration between people, humans, and a machine actually producing a view of what the future may look like, which also puts some question in terms of how you need to govern the process and how clear is everyone in terms of the different planning processes and their role. So in terms of what's the purpose of a forecast, what's the purpose of a budget, what's the purpose of a scenario planning, and when do you use those tools and for what reasons. So the interesting thing here is what is the role of AI in enabling all this? And I wish I could tell you that AI will actually do all that for you, and you can do a perfect planning process right now, but we're not quite there yet. And I think what we're going to do now is that Adam will spend some time exploring a bit more in terms of what artificial intelligence is and which parts of the planning processes are more prone to be used and apply the AI technology to make the process more responsive and more effective. Over to you, Adam.
Just quickly before we get into it, so I might just briefly touch on the overall agenda for today. So first off, what we want to cover is really what is artificial intelligence, where are some of the applications in performance management, and then also a bit around how organisations are actually getting artificial intelligence into what they're doing now. Secondly, David will be going through a live demonstration of JEDOC. So we don't want to just talk about kind of what artificial intelligence can do, but we also want to show you a practical demonstration of how the AI tool, and particularly JEDOC, can help the planning process itself. And then finally, Lewis is going to cover off on kind of what's important for implementing artificial intelligence. So what do you need to think about to get it right and make the most of what you're trying to implement. So just to start with, we've got just a quote here, which is just pretty succinctly covers off some of the main points of what we mean when we're talking about artificial intelligence. So firstly, an algorithm needs to be able to interpret the data. So traditionally, this might have just been structured data coming from a database, but more and more these days, the expectations of artificial intelligence is that not only will it take in structured data, but it will also bring in unstructured data, such as text and images, to help with those processes. Secondly, and most important, is kind of the ability for AI to learn from this data. And this kind of separates it from what was done previously. So the idea here is that when you have an AI solution set up, the more data you provide it, either more information or a greater timescale should help it to get a better understanding of what's happening and produce better relationships to getting an output, which is the next point. So, thirdly, what the AI should be able to do is produce a relationship that can drive an outcome or a specific goal. So when we talk about AI, there's kind of two larger categories that we probably talk about. The first being machine learning. And this is kind of the more traditional approach, which looks at a lot of it is regression algorithms, but what you get out of this and what's different is that you get a visible understanding of the relationship that's being developed. So you can kind of see how the inputs are driving the output. Contrasting that is kind of the newer and the approaches that have come in kind of in recent years, which is more the neural networks. And what differs from the traditional machine learning approach there is that, unlike previously where you could see kind of what the relationship was that was developed and why it's driving the outcome, a neural network might be more accurate, but it will require a lot more data. And then what you lose is also the visibility of that, what is the relationship and how it's driving that goal. So the layers of the neural nodes that make up the kind of neural network abstract or hide what it's doing, but the opportunity there is the trade-off is you can get something more accurate. Finally, the process should be flexible. And really what we're talking about here is it's not enough to just be able to perform the process once and work with the data that it's being given. But an AI solution should really be able to take in more data, either more time in the future or consider things happening in the future or estimates of some of the drivers and use that data to drive the same output again. So make an estimation of what's going to happen or what the result is based off that new data. In terms of how this applies to kind of performance management and finance, there's a lot of different ways to kind of categorize how AI algorithms work or what they are, but kind of the best one that aligns with what a financial analyst does is really kind of looking at the applications that they can be applied to. Looking here, this kind of starts with, moving from descriptive up to descriptive. So descriptive, the kind of the basic task, so what happens. So in this case, for a financial analyst, there might be performance reporting. Here AI can help to, the best example is kind of NLP reporting. So this is kind of query-based reporting where instead of having someone having to go and produce the report itself, in these cases, you provide a natural language query to the solution and it produces the report that it thinks answers your question. Next level up, and probably quite important to financial analysis, is diagnostic, and that's looking at why did something happen. In these cases, again, looking at natural language is kind of an approach to solve that. Kind of the big area that's coming out now and one that's starting to grow is the ability to produce a commentary. So in this case, the algorithm will not only know what happened, but it will start to look at why did that happen and produce a natural language outcome that someone can read and understand what it's talking about. The third level, and what we'll be talking about today in a lot more detail, particularly David's example that he'll show, is the predictive aspect. And this is where there's a lot of area, a lot of value, and a lot of things that have been developed to support financial analysts. And this is looking at planning and forecasting. So trying to predict what will happen next and using machine learning to either drive more accuracy through that process or otherwise make that process faster to reduce kind of the planning cycles that exist today. And the final level of kind of these capabilities is prescriptive. So what should we do? And this is an area that probably hasn't been looked at as much to date, just because we'll talk about in a second kind of resource capabilities catching up with it. But this is looking at kind of how algorithms can help us make better decisions and tell us what is the best option when we're looking at different things. So I think David and Lewis have spoken a little bit around, why planning needs to change. And I think there's another aspect to that, which is why people should be looking at AI now. So the concepts that kind of sit behind AI have been around for a while. So even neural networks themselves have been around since the 1950s. But what wasn't possible back then was to actually put that theory into application. So the changes we've seen over recent times in increasing processing power and kind of accessibility to that have really changed what's possible and also what's accessible to people based on the cost. So in recent times in particular, kind of the growth of cloud computing has really made accessing that processing power kind of more accessible to a lot more people at a much cheaper cost to start applying it in more areas than what was previously considered. So moving on from kind of what we're talking about when we speak about AI, we also wanted to look at kind of how AI is being implemented today and what organizations are considering when they do this. So looking at some of the trends, so in 2019, Deloitte ran a survey across 5 organizations that were kind of been as early adopters. Actually, sorry, this survey was 1,900 early adopters of AI across 7 different countries. And what they wanted to look at was kind of, what kind of success these organizations have had and also what that meant for the future. So the key thing we want to call out is AI has become more cost effective and organizations are driving a return from it. It's not just something, that's kind of an out there concept that requires a large amount of investment to see anything back. Across all these organizations, they saw a return. So by half of those were between kind of 10 to 20%. There were quite a few that had 30 to 40% return based on the investment that they'd put in place to get that AI solution working. Based on this, kind of the investment has grown. So a lot of organizations are looking at small solutions, and especially when they're getting started, it's easy to kind of go down the pilot route and try that out to get that in place. And then kind of as they go into the future, they expand that more. So once they've proven the capabilities of AI, they really look to expand their investment. So looking at kind of a larger project range of 500K plus is becoming much more important. But also kind of their expectations year on year is only 1% of the organizations that responded said they wanted to keep their investment the same. Everyone wants to improve their investment, and that's partly driven by the fact that they are seeing the return that they want to see from this. So then finally, how are these organizations adopting AI solutions? So the big question kind of when it comes to implementing a new solution like this is build versus buy. And what we're seeing is that, although organizations are, most likely to buy, just in the general percentages from this survey, it tends to be a blend. So organizations aren't normally just doing one, they're doing a combination of the two. So how this works is that, existing out there and what's possible to buy is some pre-existing solutions that become an accelerator. So, where a problem exists that's common across a lot of organizations, it doesn't always make sense to go out and try and build something from scratch when you can buy something that'll do the job for you, which is more cheaper, more effective, and quicker to implement. Then what this does is it kind of frees up capacity across the organization, either resources or people, to focus on the build. And where the build comes in is, there might not be a solution that exists that makes sense for the specific problem being targeted. And in this case, an organization will want to focus some attention on those opportunities, and that's where there's kind of a unique value to them, where they can't just pick a solution off the shelf and put that into place. Another trend is kind of, how they're approaching talent or capability within the organization. So at the start of kind of AI, there was a lot of people looking to hire people externally. So the skills weren't that wide, they were hard to develop, and there wasn't a lot of people to choose from, which created kind of a narrow talent pool and a lot of competition to pull those people in. But what was discovered kind of after that is that having someone that's good at AI or machine learning or something like that doesn't mean they understand the business well enough to put that into place. So organizations are starting to change their strategy, and really that's about building up those skills internally across the resources they already have, and kind of have that understanding of the organization already, and then trying to build AI on top of that. So having people that understand the organization and can apply that through artificial intelligence or machine learning. What these organizations see is not only, is there a benefit based on that from building the skills internally, but there's also it helps solve some competitiveness of the job market. So for the tasks that don't require that kind of heavy technical expertise or coding, so in the case of a buyer where it's more about interpreting or understanding the result, it can be a lot more cost effective and a lot easier to build those skills up internally rather than trying to find someone externally to fill that role. The final one, and the final point I want to cover that we'll talk about a bit today, is kind of the trend for augmentation over automation, or in this case, what we really mean is complete automation. So to effectively implement AI, and it's kind of similar to the process that people have gone through with RPA in recent years as well, is what it's about is kind of balancing the best of both worlds. So what is the kind of human component good at versus what is the machine good at? So, AI is very good where there's a lot of data. It's kind of I'll say heavily repeatable. That's kind of how AI works in terms of repeating the same activities over again to get the best solution. And then also where there's a lot of processing power required. So in these cases, it's a lot more cost effective to put the AI solution in place to do that rather than having people trying to work through that, or possible to have due to the sheer scope of what needs to be done to get to the outcome. And then what that needs to be balanced with is kind of the value adding the financial provide. So what they need to do is understand the outputs and make decisions with them. And part of that is having that capability to interpret and understand what the output means based on their own understanding. Yeah, again, it's also having the right process in place so that the end-to-end process puts the human and the machine in the right place. So as they go through the planning process, the machine picks up the task it should, and the people are in place to look at that after that's done and hand it off to the machine again if required at the end of that. I think that covers some of the key points.
I think that's fantastic, and probably what we'd like to reinforce is lately, and we're talking in the past 2 years, we're seeing more and more AI-based solutions being applied in clients from Deloitte, and a couple of very specific to the planning space. One of our clients is a supermarket, and they are using this to estimate the price sensitivity to changes in discounts in the stores. But the good thing is that they are looking at ways of integrating that into the financial forecast. Other example is a telecommunication company that they were trying to forecast more efficiently the wireless revenue, and as you will imagine, if they asked most of their executives what were the drivers, and they came up with approximately 50 drivers of movements in the wireless revenue, and applying the correct techniques, they were able to reduce these to less than 10. So you could imagine first the reduction in the level of complexity of the analysis one, but also that means that it's less data that you need to collect, less data that you need to monitor for planning purposes. And I could continue with more examples in terms of things that we've seen recently. Probably the last one I'm going to mention, which is very, very close to heart, because we have a few clients in the electricity transmission space. So, for example, the use of AI to identify risk factors for particular assets that require maintenance. So again, this is operations, but at the same time, a lot of the maintenance budget and the maintenance plans for these companies are attached to the operational metrics. So you can see how it can link together to have a better overview in terms of where the spend is going to go. So definitely, AI is not something that is about to happen. It's already happening in most organizations. So it's important that it's taken seriously within organizations to improve their own processes. So I think we're going to go now to a specific example, and David's going to walk us through that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lewis. And whilst we're doing that, Melissa, it's just speaking of many organizations that are actually doing this at the moment. Melissa will be sharing a short survey in the box to the side there that you can give your view in terms of how your finance organization is embracing it. And I think there were some really good examples there that were shared. But one of the things that I often hear is that you see a lot of really deep operations types of projects embracing AI. They're often a level below what the classic FP&A role might be, which, let's say, would start with a three-way forecast, for example, move on to integrated business planning. So what I'm going to talk about today is really take a step back and, rather than showing the flashy lights of the art of the possible with like a, hey Siri, what's my EBIT going to look like type of approach, I'm going to focus on a very simple example, something very familiar, a P&L. Just before I get to that though, I'm going to talk about a pilot, and Lewis will touch on in a few more minutes some of the critical success factors around how you can do this well in your organizations. But the reason why I'm starting with a pilot is just to really illustrate that when it's something new for the organization, when it's something new for the team, there's a need to go through some learnings. And so there can be a lot of common sense in taking a think big, start small, deliver quickly, or scale fast type of approach. And that's what a pilot typically delivers for you. So the example I've selected, it might seem an interesting one given where we are this year, but it comes from the hotel and hospitality industry, which is obviously a sector that's facing a lot of headwinds at the moment. But I think it's a good illustration of the power of AI that can help organizations, whether they're on the way up or whether they're experiencing challenges. In this example, they had some specific outcomes they were looking for from the pilot. They didn't want to test the validity of AI. Does it work? How would it work? It was more about the use case that they were selecting. So that was critical. They weren't testing the technology or the platform. They were validating the outcome they were seeking. And what their objective was around occupancy forecasting at a daily level for every room across their hotel chains. Now, for the pilot, they reduced the scope there, and they had three outcomes they were looking for. The first was speed. That was about just a simple automation, process improvement, process efficiency, free up time from the planners who are in there using their spreadsheets and other tools to manually put the plans together. That was step one. Step two, of course, the hurdle or the the return was about delivering at least as good as forecast as was currently done, because they didn't want to go backwards in the process. And the third point, and this is where they could start to look at some of those deeper operational outcomes, was going deeper on the actual plan itself. So rather than just a simple number, they could start breaking it down by different cohorts, different segments, different types of bookings, and understand at a much more nuanced level what the potential mix might be, which obviously would then flow into things like promotions, room pricing, and so on. Now, I'll come back to the outcomes and what they achieved shortly, but let's now go to a live example of this. And I will be looking at my screen over here, so I'll look away from the camera slightly. And as I said before, the example I've selected is not really getting into the nitty-gritty of how the AI works, but more about focusing about how you can take it and embed it with an existing type of operational process. And so what you can see on your screen now is obviously a very, very high-level P&L. We've got our revenue up here and our cost down here. We're accumulating that into a profit, and I've heard stated that, which is pretty relevant recently, that profit is opinion while cash is fact. So we could be focusing on a cash flow forecast here, but I've picked the P&L, and we've got a comparison between a short-range forecast, which is rolling forecast, it's a diminishing value here, as well as a budget, which hasn't been populated yet. So this is really our starting point. And I'm going to look at just the revenue number and drill into that a little bit more and see how we can use predictive to improve the quality and the accuracy of the forecasting around that. Now, in order to display all the information, I'll just shift to a slightly different view of that, where I've zoomed out somewhat so that I can show you more of what's happening at the same time. Now, typically, if I was doing or an organization was doing a top-line forecast, they might start from a top-down perspective and look at something like the forecast, perhaps on a monthly level, compare that to the actual, compare it to the budget, and then perhaps start with the budget from last year and copy that information in. Now you can see here, that's not just a single number, that's drilling down to customer segments. And later on, what you'll see is that drills down to individual products as well. Now, obviously, we're not in Germany, where the bulk of the numbers are right at the moment. So let me just run that again, but pull that across so that we've got some numbers over here. Now, those numbers are a little bit small, so let's just use a little trick here to basically enhance those numbers. So I'm going to add sort of a 5 million per period, and now we've got a much higher forecast here in Australia. So that's a typical kind of top-down process where we're looking at some overall assumptions and we're pushing those changes down. It's not particularly scientific, and we're not really getting any power of a bottom-up based on a prediction here. So what I'm going to do now is leave that out for a moment, and we're going to go back to the drawing board and just look at using AI to or predictive forecasting to augment this plan instead. Now, the first step we need to do is to go and get our data. I'm not going to step through that one by one, but the key concept here is that you want an automated process to go and put that information into a consistent hub. Whether it's a CRM like Salesforce, because you've got a sales team which are out there forecasting their closes, or it might be a point of sale or an Oracle data warehouse. Wherever your data is, you need to pull that in to have a firm foundation. The other point is that it's not necessarily just internal data, but you might want to connect into the Reserve Bank, for example, or into Bloomberg or another source in order to enrich that data. The idea of automatically having feeds in really enables you to start planning at speed. Now, once we've got our data into the model, the next point is to start using some tools to do predictions over this. Now, in the time available, what I'm just going to illustrate is just how you can take quite a high-level wizard-based approach to set up your forecast. And I'm not going to get into the deep depths of actually analyzing that from multiple perspectives. But what you can see on the screen is that perhaps if we were doing the daily forecast for our occupancy, we'd be selecting our daily and selecting our period. Here we're looking at a monthly forecast, and we're looking at what time period we're forecasting forward. Another point is that often with a lot of raw data, when you get more detailed into it, there may be some gaps in it. So the idea of outlier detection as well as interpolation are different techniques to basically smooth out your data so you've got a firm foundation there. And the next point is to be able to select the type of prediction that you want to run over your data. Now, last night I was on another webinar actually, and one of the finance directors was actually had a master in data science from the University of Wisconsin, and he probably would be in a position to have an opinion on the pros and cons of exponential smoothing versus costed method. But for myself and for a lot of folks in finance, I'd be quite happy just to select the best and let the AI actually run through all the different types of forecasting and select which one has the outcomes that I'm looking for based on the constraints. Now, the final component here is the concept of when you're just doing AI, it's not one thing clearly. There are different types of techniques, and the sort of AI that you'd use to forecast customer churn would be different from what you'd do for time series forecasting. If we think back to that hotel chain, where they started with their pilot was using the booking system. It was called Opera, so they could see bookings coming through, they could see cancellations, and then they could use this to start predicting forward. But that was a relatively limited data set. So what they started to do was augment that and add additional sources like TripAdvisor, like Facebook, so they could start getting granular and understanding what was happening by different market segments. The concept of a driver-based prediction is that you could bring in social indicators. You could bring in when is a lockdown going to finish in Melbourne, where I'm on this webinar from, for example. And you could bring in economic data, climate data, etc. So all of these extra data points help enhance the value of the planning model. And there are tools and techniques in terms of identifying which of those types of drivers or measures would be most appropriate, as Lewis described in that example where the telco went down to about under 10 key drivers from around 70. So we've set up our prediction, we've got our data in there. The next step is to run the prediction process. It's already been done here. The key point, and this is one of the reasons why I'm using this example, is that when you do a prediction, the last thing you want to do is go out and hire a data scientist, some graduate, and have another, literal version of the truth sitting alongside the integrated business plan. What's far more productive and useful is if that prediction provides a check and balance back to the actual human-based plan. And in this example, what you can do, as we start drilling down in the information, we've done a prediction, not just by all of those different customer segments, but we've done it down at a product level. So I could drill down to even down to an individual SKU here, and we can see both the predicted value coming across, but we can also see an adjustment. So if I come along here and make an adjustment here, like that, you can see that information pushed across. So you've got this combination of the predictive model, which is definitely not a black box, more of a glass box, because you can go and look at the accuracy, you can understand the algorithm. Then you've got the ability of adding human-based forecast on top of that. Now, I want to highlight one thing here, which is above upper bounds. And the issue here is that a predictive forecast hasn't given us one number, it's given us a range based on possible outcomes. So it's very powerful scenario planning. Now, if we take a look at one of those exceptions here, what we can see is that in the middle here, we've got our actuals, in this case, back to March. Then we've got our prediction. We've got our most likely prediction in the middle here, but then we've also got a best and worst case type scenario here in blue. And up here, we can see our adjustments, how they're pushing us above what would be considered the acceptable range. Now, you can go on to use things like workflow, capture commentary, etc., for people to understand the why case. Maybe there's a large deal, for example, which is not captured in the history, which the team knows that they're about to close. So it's this combination of bottom-up planning and interactive planning, which means that you're not giving over your power of forecasting to a machine, but instead you're actually improving the collaboration and the feedback as a business partner back to the business, so they can fully understand the financial and the commercial implications of their operational decisions. The last point here, before I conclude, is that I've been focusing on one number here, which is revenue. But obviously, revenue doesn't sit alone. It's not an island. It doesn't exist outside of the greater organization. And when you're looking at different types of planning methodologies, our sales, for example, might be based on demand forecasts, and AI is very suitable. But in our production, there may be drivers and assumptions. For example, imagine we've got cold storage or cold supply chain, and suddenly, because all the airlines have stopped flying, the cost of transporting some of those raw materials has shot up. So suddenly that has an implication on our margins, which has an implication on our working capital. The key is that it's factored into an integrated model where you're combining predictive plus the classic driver-based integrated business planning, so you get to pull those levers and understand the constraints. And the last point is that when we're looking at something like our costs, potentially, especially in the current environment, we don't just want to take a trend of history and say, you know, what does the past pattern look like? Instead, we might want to take a zero-based approach and say, you know, what do you actually need to spend? Again, the value of the prediction is not that it's a new process that sits outside of your current planning, but rather it's deeply woven and embedded into the fabric of your planning processes. So just to finish off, if we come back to that pilot that we had before, now if you recall, the goal was to set a daily occupancy and revenue forecast per room per the next 4 months per day. What did they achieve from that? Well, first of all, from a speed perspective, they went from forecasting twice a week to daily forecast. So that obviously gave them a lot more visibility and gave the managers the ability of making much faster decisions. And also the greater integration with the marketing team meant that they could do something about it a lot faster rather than just reviewing post facto what happened. They also achieved great accuracy. As I mentioned before, it didn't happen just by pulling in their existing bookings. They had to overlay other data sources onto that to really get the true value and get a broader picture. But some pretty compelling results. And remember, that's not replacing humans, that's the baseline that the planners could go and tweak and adjust on top of that. So that was a very powerful outcome. And the final point was that this was a pilot, so they constrained the scope. There were literally 350 combinations of segments and booking sources for each room, which made it, you know, even at that level, it really showcased the power of AI to be able to, you know, deal with these different factors in a way that would be almost impossible if you're doing it in spreadsheets or manual processes. Now, obviously, I mentioned before that the hotel industry, as we know, like many others, are undergoing a lot of challenges at the moment. But principally, the goal here wasn't to just do process automation. That really was the starting point. So it was really about freeing up time for the planners to be able to focus on higher value activities, like being, you know, moving from a storekeeper to a strategic business partner. And that process is really a journey. And now, as I hand off to Lewis, I think he'll explain some of the more critical success factors about actually succeeding and delivering this inside your organizations.
Thanks, David. Just before we hand over, there's a question from the audience. If the accuracy of AI is so high, does it mean the data collection is in high level?
That's a really good question. I can pick that up initially if you like, and Adam or Lewis if you want to add something onto that. Look, the accuracy of a predictive forecast is not guaranteed. It's a process of going through, understanding some of the drivers of your business and be able to go down to a deeper level. So, for example, how do you define accuracy? If I say, here's a number for Australia for a month, that's kind of one number. That might be the one you're reporting publicly. But if you start going below that to hotels or to hospitals or to something else, that's another consideration in accuracy. So a lot of the process of going through that pilot is defining the outcome. Is it something just to do better external reporting, or are we going to hand this off to our sales team to be able to actually use it to drive conversations back with customers who are risking churning, for example? But fundamentally, it's both the quality of the data, even though there are tools like interpolation, outlier detection to try and massage that data, but it also depends on the level of data that you need based on the use case that you're looking to achieve. And Adam or Lewis, perhaps Lewis, before you start your section, is there anything you'd like to add to that point?
Yes, I think it's an excellent question, because anyone who's working in analytics or in AI, I will tell you that most of the effort will come into getting the data in the right format, and then right at the end applying the right methodology. It's just the very last bit, actually getting the data. And there's a couple of things to take into account. Not always going more granular will give you better accuracy, for example, and not always going for longer periods of time will give you a more accurate estimation. So there is definitely a little bit of science into this. But having said that, a lot of these tools like JEDOS, what they're going to do is they'll help you make the process a little bit more practical. You still will need to have somebody who understands data, understands analytics to help you and guide you through the process to actually get you to the right outcome. So I think that's important, and it's good because it's a good lead into the next section, which is what do you need if you want to succeed in this type of with this type of technology. And if we talk very specifically about the planning process, potentially we can describe the process these days in 5 steps. We should still start with working out what your information model is, and what we mean by that is that you need to start thinking about who are the decision makers that you're supporting, what type of decisions they make, what sort of information you need to feed them to actually make those decisions important, and then start working backwards in terms of and what sort of data points do we need, and where is that start working out. The second point is very important, which is Adam already went through the fact that you're unlikely to be able to automate the entire end-to-end sort of data to decision cycle, right? So you need to start pinpointing the areas where you can actually use AI, analytics, or any other digital technology to actually make the process more efficient. If you need a little bit of a guidance in terms of how to detect those opportunities, normally you will find processes that require data to produce the input, to produce the final output of a process. Then processes that actually have the data and there's a reasonable amount of data volume to leverage. Processes where that relationship between the outcome and the data inputs, they are not all that well understood and not easy it's not easy to actually get a good understanding of how that plays. So in the planning process, the typical ones will be in terms of data preparation. There will be components of driver selection. There will be components of actually doing the trend analysis and the prediction. There's other cases that are interesting in terms of sifting through external information to detect trends in the macroeconomic events that you need to be aware of, which is particularly important today. Then the important thing is that you start going into 3 and 4. Once you understand how the decision maker will be using the information and what format, and you can start working out what the process needs to look like. You can reimagine that process using digital technologies. And then, very important, not a lot of clients try to improve everything at the same time. Even when you start using predictive analytics or AI, you wouldn't predict the entire P&L in just one go. It's very likely that you're going to get a particular model, a particular line that is particularly beneficial, and that's where you start. Try it, get it right, and then move on to the next. And then that's the way it works this day. That actually de-risks a lot of the implementation. And then the final point, which people don't, sometimes they forget about, is that you can make all this wonderful information available out there, but if it's not used in the decision making effectively, then basically, as I normally say, all you get is a little bit of a nice story. So how do you embed this process into the day-to-day decision making is critical. And also, as you start making decisions, how do you create a bit of a feedback loop to start improving your analytical process over time, which is arguably is where the real benefit is how do you actually understand better your business as you start going through these cycles. Then probably one big idea that I want to leave with you, there's definitely a difference between running a proof of concept or a pilot or buying a product that has an AI capability and running AI at scale and then having a defined capability as a business. So if in the future you want to actually scale this and start applying AI to different processes, so that's when you need to start taking more of a strategic view. You can start from the information model I mentioned in my previous slide, but then start defining where you want to get with AI, what's going to be the benefit to your business, start exploring some of the risks associated with it. Cybersecurity being one of the big sort of issues that has been discussed in this area, and then in terms of for your organization, how do you structure your organization? So you may need to start exploring concepts like having a center of excellence to deal with analytics and AI. How you're gonna get requests and manage those requests for application of AI and innovation. How do you actually deliver projects is likely to change a lot as well. So those things also need to be taken into account. And then finally, how do you manage talent within your organization? So Adam already touched a little bit on this, right? But a couple of things is that you should be able and aim that everyone in your organization at least has a basic level of awareness of what is the application of the benefits of using AI in the organization. Because it is the people who are living the processes who will be better placed to tell you where it's going to add a lot of value. Then also mention the ability of having blended skills. So in terms of having that business understanding, technical understanding, and financial lens in a blended team to actually really get to a point where you produce a final product that is really adding value to your business and it's really adding value to decision makers. And one final idea, which is, if you're exploring this idea of the centers of excellence, one thing that we've seen in other organizations is that you use them as well as an education forum. So the idea is that as they start exploring new solutions and new innovation points, they can educate everyone in the business, and they can use you can use that to actually uplift everyone while the center of excellence itself focus on the most complex things. So that would be from me, David.
Thanks, Lewis. I'm just conscious of the time, so I wondered if, David, you wanted to step in?
Yeah, if we could just go to the last slide for 1 second. Yeah, so given the time, I'm going to give my 30-second takeaway, and then I'm going to invite Lewis and Adam to share their 30 seconds as well. So my takeaway is that, when we take the learnings from the last month, finance CFOs need to really permanently add speed, flexibility, and collaboration into planning and forecasting. Now, AI is here already, as we've seen today, and you do need to quickly move up the maturity just to keep up. So think about things like pilots as a way to learn fast. And the final point is that when you're doing this, ensure that whatever you're doing with AI extends and augments your existing processes. So it's got to be part of the integrated business planning. Think about how it's actually going to be uptake and how it will be embraced by people. And Adam, is there anything that you'd like to add? I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Just quickly, I kind of wanted to build on the point that you and Lewis made at the start. Why is changing planning important now? And that's kind of why AI is an option for that now. And I think kind of what we've seen in very recent years is, especially what you showed me, Jedox, kind of the integration of AI into existing products to kind of make it easy to implement and get started down the AI journey. And just also the increasing kind of availability of processing power and the cost dropping on that, which is making it even easier and more cost effective for organizations to get involved in it and start exploring what they can do. Thanks, Alice. And then Lewis, what about your final thoughts?
Well, probably my last thought on all this is you can see that there is definitely a trend of using AI in finance, and the technology cycles are getting really short, and late adoption is starting to become something that doesn't really make sense, because by the time that you wait for everyone else to try to see if it works and you start learning and trying to embed it, by the time that you catch up, everybody has moved into something else. So you can see that the entry point is not complicated. However, the learning curve is steep. So if you are still to get into this, I will highly recommend you to start exploring ways in which you can use AI to improve your planning processes.
Thanks, Lewis. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, David. This has been a very interesting session, and we've got lots of questions that are now flowing through, but I'm conscious that we're out of time. So I might just hand over quickly to Melissa to just do a little housekeeping wrap up and let us know how we might deal with some of these questions. But thank you again to all our speakers. A lot to think about there.
Thanks again to our speakers, and thanks everyone for your participation today. During the next 3 working days, you'll receive an evaluation survey accompanied by a recording of this session. We really appreciate your feedback, as it is extremely valuable to help us deliver better events for you. Thanks again, and we look forward to welcoming you to another CPA Australia webinar soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.